Hello and welcome to the Debka Files. I'm Gabrielle Weiniger with exclusive news and analysis from the region and across the world. In your top headlines this week, US President Donald Trump is set to reveal a new strategy on Iran ahead of a key deadline to certify the landmark nuclear deal. Turkish troops are deployed along the border with Syria, marking the start of a major joint military operation to oust extremists from the country's northwest. And all that glitters is gold as the Sultan of Brunei marks his 50-year reign in style. Spotlight's back on the Iranian nuclear deal this week as US President Donald Trump is due to sign off on the landmark agreement struck with world powers 2 years ago. Trump will have to review the deal ahead of a key deadline to decide if Iran is keeping up its end of the bargain. Debka sources in Washington saying he'll denounce the pact as against America's national interests, previously calling it an embarrassment and the worst deal ever negotiated. Now saying Iran is a, quote, bad player that will be taken care of.
I believe they're funding North Korea. I believe they're trading with North Korea. I believe they're doing things with North Korea that is totally inappropriate. That doesn't pertain to the deal, but in my opinion it does, because it's called the spirit of a deal. And you will see what I will be doing in the not too distant future. But Iran is a bad player, and they will be taken care of as a bad player.
Trump also reportedly set to designate Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. But Trump's own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, saying the president should stick to the agreement before renegotiating the terms.
We'll have a recommendation for the president. We're going to give him a couple of options of how to move forward to advance the important policy towards Iran.
Now, Debka File sources saying the administration is already formulating new options to impose fresh sanctions against Iran. First, the US military will activate countermeasures to fend off Iran's missile threats to Persian Gulf shipping lanes and naval vessels. Next, the US counterintelligence will target secret Iranian networks across Latin America. Then, intelligence operations will be intensified against Iran's ballistic missile program, and the CIA will step up its surveillance on Iranian undercover agents abroad. Now, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has threatened a decisive response if any of the parties violate the nuclear deal, saying the agreement is, quote, not reversible. The head of Iran's Nuclear Energy Commission, Ali Akbar Salehi, saying this week that if the US pulls out, Iran can fully activate its nuclear program.
The American administration's overtly hostile attitude and actual foot-dragging policies and measures aimed at undermining the nuclear deal and blocking Iran's legitimate benefits from its full and unimpeded implementation.
Debka File's intelligence sources saying Tehran has already violated the agreement by continuing to manufacture high-speed centrifuges in secret factories, as well as failing to pour cement inside the core reactor at the Arak plant and denying inspectors access to military sites, instead producing soil samples from alleged testing sites which could be from anywhere. But the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN watchdog monitoring Iran's progress, says Tehran is complying with the pact.
That it is a non-proliferation deal, which has been endorsed by the UN Security Council, that it's working, delivering, as it has been verified 8 times by the International Agency for Atomic Energy. And so it's a durable, long-term solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, which gives all sides the necessary assurances that they need, and that we expect all sides to stick to their commitments under the current deal. So this is a position which is already well known.
Now, according to the language of the nuclear deal, it must be certified by the American president every 90 days, meaning the next deadline is coming up on October 15th. That deadline fast approaching, let's bring in this week's guest, Dr. Frien Cam, former Deputy Director of the INSS. Dr. Cam, the President has already signed off on the deal twice, in spite of his persistent opposition. What's different this time, and why has he upped his rhetoric against Iran ahead of this deadline?
First of all, I don't know what he's going to say on the coming Thursday. and what the Congress is going to do sometime after next week, because he's, in a way, you don't know what he's going to do and what he's going to say. The point is that I'm sure that he about two things. One, that he really believes that Iran creates a major threat for the United States, for its allies, for its interest. And secondly, I strongly believe that he really thinks that the agreement, the nuclear agreement, is a bad one. And
so what's the alternative to that nuclear agreement? It was such a historic deal when it was struck 2 years ago. Will it now unravel?
It's going to be very difficult. And this is the main point, because there are many players in this game which are against cancelling or abrogating the agreement. In the first place, Iran. Iran will not agree to cancel the agreement.
And it's already threatened to restart its nuclear program if Washington pulls out.
Yes, Iran threatened that it's going to renew the nuclear program if the agreement is going to be cancelled by the United States. Secondly, the 5 other partners to the agreement, the European, Russian, and the Chinese governments, are against cancelling the agreement or changing it or reopening the negotiations about the agreement. And third, in the United States, there are many players which are against opening the agreement or cancelling the agreement. So President Trump is facing a large objection to what he thought at the beginning that should be done with regard to the agreement.
If he doesn't certify the deal, it's going to be up to Congress to decide what to do. They're going to have 60 days to vote on it. Do you think they're going to reimpose sanctions on Iran, which will, of course, effectively withdraw the US from the pact?
It could happen. Perhaps they won't cancel the agreement, but they would impose or reimpose sanctions, not all the sanctions perhaps, but some sanctions on Iran as a kind of punishment to tell the Iranians, we are not going to accept your position. And the point is that it's not only the problem of the nuclear agreement and the nuclear program of Iran. The problem is that Iranian behavior in the Middle East and the Iranian involvement in terrorism. These are the main concerns of the United States with regard to Iran. And there are many partners to this perception.
So how is Tehran looking at all of this? Is this the beginning of the end of the deal for them?
Not necessarily. They hope very much that the Americans will think twice before they're going to cancel the agreement, taking into account that the Europeans and Russian and Chinese are going to object it. And secondly, they are threatening against the United States. They are threatening the United States that if the United States is going to cancel the agreement, the first thing that the Iranians will do is to renew the nuclear program, and then they're going to be very quickly at the same place that they were 2 years ago when the agreement was
canceled. And the same
canceled.
place they are now currently at with North Korea.
Correctly. They learned something from North Korea, and they did understand that North Koreans insisted on continuing the nuclear program, and eventually they succeeded. For the Iranians, this was a very important lesson for their own program.
OK, all eyes on Donald Trump ahead of this looming deadline, October 15th, to certify the nuclear deal or not. Dr. Frien Cam, former Deputy Director of the INSS, thank you so much for joining us here at the Debka Files.
Thank you very much.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced the start of a major military operation in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. That's near the southern Turkish border, to clear out former al-Qaeda-linked Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the renamed Nusra Front. But it soon turned out that the Turks have been firing cross-border artillery, and not a single Turkish soldier has been sent across that border. This, Debka sources saying, because the 3 allies who negotiated in Astana over resolving the Syrian crisis, that's Russia, Turkey and Iran, were passing the buck on which one of them would deploy ground troops for the operation. Iran says Turkey, which is closest to Idlib. Erdogan wants Iranian forces to do the job, while the Russians stick to aerial bombardment. But Debka analysts say this operation will not be easy. Idlib province is over 7,000 square kilometres, and its 2 million inhabitants are thinly spread out in many locations. For now, Turkey says it will provide assistance to rebels it has long backed, aiming to implement a de-escalation agreement designed to reduce fighting in the most populous pocket of Syria, still in rebel hands.
Fırat Kalkanı Harekatı'yla kendimize bölgemizde açtığımız alanı şimdi İdlib'in güvenliğini sağlamaya yönelik yeni bir adımla daha ileriye taşımanın gayreti içerisindeyiz. İşte bugün örneğin İdlib'de ciddi bir harekat var. ve bu devam edecek.
Let's bring in Dr. Near Berms, Research Fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center in Tel Aviv University. We're going to discuss the operation there in Idlib. Dr. Berms, Turkish authorities refer to this as a serious campaign against Tahrir al-Sham. They control most of the Idlib province. Who is leading this cross-border campaign?
Well, this campaign is connected to the de-escalation agreement. And the de-escalation agreement, the de-escalation zone, which is the Russian, Turkish, and Iranian plan that was agreed upon, is another way of creating influence zones in Syria. Of course, the Turks are very interested in the northern Syrian zone, and this was the northern western province of Idlib, for mainly two reasons. One, it is adjacent to their border, and this is certainly the area when they want to see influence. And second, the issue with the Kurds is also connected to that broader border area.
So might we then see Turkish troops enter into that area, into the Idlib province?
Well, the Turks, we have to remember that the Turks have entered Syria a number of times. This seems to be an attempt of creating a larger operation. We have yet to see the scale and scope of this operation as it will unfold. But this is certainly connected to the attempts of controlling the future of Syria. Who is going to control and influence Syria as a whole, and then the border areas of the stakeholders? Syria has been a major stakeholder in Syria. It wished to have its own influence with the rebel groups that will supposed to give Turkey influence in Syria in the future. And it also wants to make sure that it remains very influential in the northern part of Syria if there's going to be additional measures, again, connected to the discussion over the Kurdish issue, in where Turkey said now, along with Iraq and along with Iran, that they will remain very active and steadfast to make sure that, again, status quo is not going to change.
But it might be very difficult then to clear out this al-Qaeda affiliate, Tahrir al-Shams. They have thousands of fighters and they vow to fight to the death. And what about the thousands of civilians in that area?
Well, unfortunately, what we have seen since the very beginning in the Syrian war, that the civilians, the innocent civilians, I would add, were always the victims of these proxy powers in their fight against each other. Probably and likely they will keep on paying the price of another military campaign, unfortunately. And there's going to be excuses for this because they have terrorists amongst their midst. Of course, clearing up the Idlib province is going to be a difficult task. This has been an important stronghold of the rebels, a number of groups, and these actually became a stronger stronghold because many of the rebels ended up escaping or retreating to the Idlib province from the other areas following the advancement of the Syrian forces that have cleared a big part of the country. If they will continue to succeed with the Idlib campaign, they will be able to almost guarantee the control of Assad in Syria. Again, assuming that the Kurdish issue is going to also get itself sorted within the framework, the agreed-upon framework of the proxy powers.
Okay, Dr. Berms, we'll keep following the situation there in Idlib as the operation unfolds.
Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, in eastern Syria, Moscow continues to push on in its operation despite heavy losses. A large Russian Air Force battalion of engineers is building a large Russian base in this sensitive border region. This, according to Debka File's military sources. Construction is lengthening the existing base's 2 runways in Deir ez-Zor and possibly adding a third, building a command center and a new control tower, as well as a new hangar to accommodate Russian bombers and fighters. So what does this all mean? The air facility is located 272 kilometers from the U.S. Special Forces Ain al-Assad Air Base, that's in western Iraq, challenging America's aerial dominance there and potentially narrowing the U.S. jets' freedom of action over the Iraqi and Syrian border regions, including the Euphrates River Valley. That's jumping Putin's air force eastwards, within 500 kilometers of Baghdad. It also puts Russian forces 450 kilometers flying distance away from the US bases in northern Jordan. Debka sources noting that since crossing into the east bank of the Euphrates River, Syrian government forces have halted their advance towards the Iraqi border. That's in line with an informal deal struck with Washington in 2015, which assigned the eastern bank to American control. Staying in eastern Syria, and Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah was trying to organize a controlled withdrawal of his Shiite Lebanese militia from the Syrian civil war. That just before changing course under heavy pressure from Iran. Debka File's military sources learned that Nasrallah ordered his troops to begin exiting Aleppo and Hama. Those are towns with large Sunni populations. Now, despite notifying Russian command that Hezbollah troops will no longer cross into eastern Syria, Nasrallah announced that his forces will be joining the battle for Abu Kamal and will not stand back. He vowed that his forces would link up with pro-Iranian Iraqi Shiite militias coming in from the other side of the border, and that they would fight together to liberate Abu Kamal from the hands of the Islamic State group. Hezbollah was looking to cut back on heavy casualties suffered in eastern Syria in the government's Russian-backed campaign to recover the area from ISIS, as Hezbollah makes up some 70% of the mixed army backing President Bashar al-Assad. The planned pullback was triggered by the death of Hezbollah commander Ali al-Sheikh, killed by an ISIS landmine near Deir ez-Zor. Now, with only one Syrian contingent still intact on this front, the 4th Armoured Division, known as the Elite Tiger Force, Russian and Syrian high commands will be relying heavily on Hezbollah fighters in their campaign to clear ISIS out of eastern Syria. But Nasrallah saying this week American actions are in fact aiding jihadists.
هلا ممكن البعض يقول كيف يا سيد، ما هن بالعراق الامريكان عم بيساعدوا، وحتى بسوريا الامريكان عم بيساعدوا. مثلا بالرقة نعم الامريكان يساعدون، لكن على قاعدة أن من سيسيطر على الرقة هي قوات حليفة للأمريكيين.
Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted Saudi Arabia's King Salman for talks at the Kremlin last week, cementing a relationship that could be pivotal when it comes to addressing regional conflicts. King Salman marks the first Saudi monarch to visit Russia, where he agreed on joint billion-dollar investment deals crucial for a Russian economy crippled by low oil prices and Western sanctions. Also on the agenda, large-scale arms purchases from Russia. That's breaking the US-European military industry's virtual monopoly of the Saudi market. Now, although no breakthrough was made on issues that divide Moscow and Riyadh, including backing rival sides of the Syrian civil war, it seems both parties here are hedging their bets. The US State Department announced the sale of its advanced THAAD missile defense system to Saudi Arabia. That's a sale worth $15 billion and intended to boost Saudi and Gulf security against Iran and other regional threats. Here are those remarks made by the Saudi king in Moscow before we bring you this week's breaking news briefs.
وبين شعبينا في مختلف المجالات مشيدا بما تتسم به من توافق في العديد من القضايا الإقليمية والدولية والتنسيق المستمر في كل ما من شأنه تعزيز الأمن والازدهار في أوطاننا وخدمة الأمن والسلام والسلم الدوليين، كما أننا حريصون على استمرار التعاون الإيجابي بين بلدينا لتحقيق الاستقرار والأسواق العالمية وخدمة النمو الاقتصادي العالمي.
Now to this week's news in brief. Most of the economic and trade sanctions the US imposed on Sudan 2 decades ago have been lifted, although Sudan is still listed as a state sponsor of terror. US officials said progress had been made on counterterrorism and human rights issues, but not enough. Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir remains wanted by the ICC for war crimes, and human rights groups oppose the easing of sanctions. Tehran says it will put the US armed forces on its terror blacklist, equating the American army with ISIS, after rumors President Donald Trump will list Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terror organization. The IRGC chief, General Mohammed Ali Jafari, says Washington is mistaken if it thinks Iran can be pressured into negotiating on regional issues. The Saudi Minister of Education has promised more positions open for female employees at universities, adding that they will also provide parking spaces for female staff and students. Speaking to students to mark International Teachers' Day, Ahmed Al-Issa added his boost for women in the kingdom, newly empowered with driving licenses as of next summer. And he may be the king of bling. The world's second longest reigning monarch and richest man celebrated 50 years in power this week. Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah was greeted by tens of thousands of well-wishers on the streets of Brunei as he travelled in a golden chariot to a special reception at his lavish golden-domed palace. But the Sultan wasn't the only one going gold this week. Saudi Arabian King Salman arrived in Moscow equipped with a golden escalator to help him disembark from his plane. Now, unfortunately, the escalator stopped moving halfway down, leaving the 83-year-old monarch with no option but to walk down the stationary steps, assisted, of course, by his hysterical entourage. Well, that wraps up this week's edition of the Debka Files. Thanks to this week's guests, Dr. Frien Cam and Dr. Near Berms, and thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime on the Debka website. That's debka.com. Or sign on to the weekly newsletter for more in-depth breaking news stories from the region and around the world. From myself and the whole team here in Tel Aviv, bye for now.